computer. Good morning, everybody. We're going to discuss, thank you for joining us today. We're going to have an exciting topic to discuss, but let me introduce myself and the panel first. My name is Rick Schultz. You might also know me as Bike Fitness Coaching. I'm very passionate about cycling, and over the past 45 years have engaged in bike racing, training, and coaching. My interest in cycling have grown from the last 15 years. I've become a master bike fitter and also run my own bike fitting education company, which focuses on back to the basics fitting education to primary physical therapists, personal trainers, chiropractors, bike shop owners, and bike mechanics. I now ride to stay in shape, around 3 hours a day on mostly indoors, which I thoroughly enjoy. During our online group workouts, we often discuss fitness, nutrition, and training, and primarily what happens to the aging athlete. So we thought about putting this little roundtable together to talk about these issues and these topics. So let me introduce the panel. We got Sue Rowland, PhD. She's a professor of neuroscience at the University of Florida. She describes herself as passionate about fitness and is also an avid cyclist. She's always been athletically active and actively encourages women to participate in sport and training activities, which is very, very true. She currently runs and participates in a daily HIIT and total body class that's offered on Zoom 808 times she's completed, and cycles 2.5 to 3 hours a day with the goal of improving her overall cycling performance. And I ride a lot with Sue, and let me tell you, over the last probably 6 months or so, a little more than 6 months, I've seen her go from about 1.5 watts per kilogram to about 2.4 watts a kilogram riding. So yes, you can get in better shape through the exercises we do. Vern He, MD, retired gastroenterologist, who received his medical training at John Burns University of Hawaii School of Medicine. Vern characterizes himself as a highly motivated, but otherwise average, mature athlete who experiences good health. His athletic interests include yoga, cycling, and which he enjoys with friends and family. He would like to some days complete the centenarian decathlon. And we got Tom Kovarik, MD, FACC, is retired cardiologist who is a fellow of American College of Cardiology, received his medical training at St. Louis University School of Medicine. Tom's forays into athletic activities following completion of his medical training. He completed his first triathlon in 1987 and his first marathon at age 52 in 2002. As a cardiologist, he felt that eating healthy foods, maintaining a normal body weight, and staying fit were actions he should engage in. He currently practices yoga and continues to cycle. And finally, it's a privilege to introduce our distinguished guest for today's discussion, Charlie Houlihan. Has been coaching and personal training since about 71 and is a former LSU varsity swimmer and Hawaii Ironman finisher. He's earned several certifications, including CSCS, PES, and CES. Charlie serves as a presenter and instructor at several national conferences hosted by NSCA, Idea Fitness Association, American Swim Coaches Association, and USA Triathlon. He coaches athletes of all abilities, from stroke survivors learning how to walk again to collegiate runners, swimmers, and soccer players. One of his most recent articles, titled Training Techniques for High Performance Masters Athletes, brought Charlie to our attention and prompted us to invite him to participate in today's discussion, an invitation which we're all thrilled he accepted. So welcome, panel. Now turn over the microphone to Sue Rowland, who will introduce our meeting topics and assist me in moderating our discussion today. Take it away, Sue.
All right. Well, I'm thrilled that Charlie accepted my, sort of shot in the dark invitation. It was interesting, and I really appreciate that you're doing this today.
Thank you
Um,
so much for asking.
you're welcome. So the focus of this panel discussion is something that I think that all mature adults start to think about in some way or another, and that's whether exercise can affect longevity and how it affects quality of life. And perhaps one of the things that we talk about a lot is not only longevity and quality of life, but we also try to think about goals and training goals. So we'll talk about two different topics today. But the first one comes from this sort of question that we all sort of think about. So if you were asked, would you choose between longevity or quality of life? Very few of us would really know which one to choose. Would you like to live longer or better? Or can you have both? In other words, they're not exclusive. And so today, the panel, we would like to know how exercises and all these training regimens we read about affect longevity and quality of life. So when we start the first topic, we're going to focus on one of the organs of the body that seems to be a central focus in most measures of exercise and health, and that is the heart. Now, we know it's hooked to all sorts of other organs, but we're going to focus sort of on the heart, but can certainly drift away from that. So what we want to do is we're going to look at cardiac function. And when we talk about it, if we stay in the mature adult, sort of 60 age range, somewhere in there, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger, you can think about 4 groups of people that loosely grouped would be considered when you start to answer questions. So first of all, we have men and we have women. And I'm particularly sensitive to the fact that most of all the research that's ever done is done on men. So that said, we would like to hear about women occasionally in these discussions. And so the 4 groups, though, are we have a group of people who do not really engage in formalized exercise, and possibly at the extreme, they do not exercise in really any way. A second group is the weekend warrior. This group decides, after Monday through Friday, it's time to get it together. So they go out and beat themselves up. Okay, the third group is a high intensity exercise group that might exercise 4 to 5 times a week. And they might do that at a gym or mix it or however they're doing it. And then there are the professional level athletes. And in that group, it might be these masters athletes that you've written about, where they are competing at the highest level. Okay, so I know there's people that fall in the cracks, but generally I could kind of see that as 4 groups. Hello there. So the first, no? Okay, so the first question we're going to ask the panel, and Charlie can, and Tom certainly can chime in because this is about cardiac function. But we're interested in cardiac function differences between 60-year-old men and women. And we could assume in looking at this that we're comparing within the same group. So if you choose to talk about an accomplished athlete, woman, man, then cardiac function in those 2. I mean, are there any big differences or are there not?
Well, first, let me clarify with all of the wonderful introductions that I got from you guys. I have an English degree. Okay, so let's start on that and be right there. I'm more familiar with rhyming couplets than I am with the rhythms of the heart, other than in terms of emotions and all that. So at any point, I'm going to yell to Tom and Vern on this, but just to start by saying is that overall, we are talking about a topic that is incredibly new, incredibly understudied, and if you tried to research cardiac function in a male and female high performance aging athlete, you would get zero nada. Okay, you might get some things about the arterial walls and how the response of estrogen and the various hormones occur as they decrease and how it affects the heart and the heart muscle. Heart is a muscle overall, but I'm of the belief, and again, Tom and Vern, please chime in, that basically there's not a lot of difference. It all comes down to what type of exercise we choose. And there's some evidence to looks at that, and solidly, that the endurance athlete's heart is a little thinner with a little thinner walls, but so it can contract rapidly. And whereas a strength and speed athlete has thicker walls where it can contract a lot of blood, but it's also muscular in a sense. It's almost kind of a scenario where you look at it and go, oh, this makes sense. You know, a strong athlete needs a stronger heart to pump blood immediately, create higher pressure from the valsalva response, or the response from holding your breath and trying to maximize your effort. Whereas an endurance heart has to beat consistently and flexibly and rapidly, you know, as needed. So from that standpoint, that's where the heart and cardiac function and all that come to play in my mind. It comes down more to the type of exercise you're doing. It comes down to your overall health, any pre-existing conditions you may have, how long you've been doing exercise, how active you've been. All of this plays into our topic today. And truth be told, there's again not a lot of information out there unless you actually study masters athletes from age 55 and older, because I think we're talking about a generation of aging high performance vehicles, I like to say, you know, vintage vehicles that are just now coming into play. We are the baby boom generation who were exposed to John F. Kennedy, the marathon boom, the running boom, the aerobics boom. We've been through all the booms, so, because we're boomers, right? And so now here we are. We are, let's take a count here. How old is everybody, if you won't mind saying? I'll go first. I'm 70.
Hey, I'm 68.
67.
73.
69.
Rock on.
There we are.
We're all kids.
All right.
Right.
So we're all, yes, we all
Kids
are.
at
And we're all, yeah, we're all relatively the same age. So, and that's kind of interesting to me because we're kind of right in the middle of the baby boom, right? We're the ones who
Right.
saw the initial start of the different programs and such, and then all of a sudden we took part in mass. So, again, I think we're talking about a topic that we've been passionate about all our lives. And so going back to heart function, Tom, Vern, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. The easiest examples are the power lifters, who are going to have thicker hearts, smaller capacity inside, and the endurance athlete, let's take a runner, who's going to have a slightly larger heart, thin, the ability to squeeze a lot of blood, a little bit lower heart rate, so that when they're out there on their bike doing a 100-mile ride, you know, they can maintain a heart rate and keep their just below their anaerobic threshold. Whereas a power lifter has to generate a lot of force in a short period of time. So, but in terms of gender differences, we don't know much. When you look at hearts, though, they look the same. It really depends on the size of the person. So because women generally are a little bit smaller, if you correct it for body mass and you look at cardiac index, there's no difference in terms of what is considered normal between men and women.
Good.
Once you correct for body mass. It's a pump. It looks pretty much the same. You know, there's really not a lot of difference. Our knowledge base, though, and I completely agree with Charlie, is this is an understudied area. We're just beginning to learn. And a lot of the references in your paper, you know, are from 2016, 2017. And
Right.
we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the focus on strength as opposed to endurance is a fairly new topic. Didn't
Correct.
used to be like that. We used to just talk about being fit was endurance, and it's different now.
Yeah, by all means. I mean, it started by the 1972 Olympic win, and I'm blanking on his name, like we blank on names all the time at our age. But that allegedly was what started the whole thing, along with Dr. Cooper's aerobics
Right.
book that came out. So yeah, it is. And the interesting thing is that we can study masters athletes, but and their performance. And what I've found that, and I also train endurance athletes and have spent the last 20 years trying to convince them to lift weights. Now, let me just add, seriously, and now it's just now happening, at least in
Right.
my area. But it's such that if I want to say somebody who's 50 years old, who is endurance, like say a performer in track or a swimmer or even a cyclist, I think age 50 is right around the time weight training became introduced to that type of athlete. It was always somewhat of a staple for collision athletes like football players and baseball players and the throwers, but basically basketball, baseball, sports like that didn't lift weights very much. And I think they added in like baseball players who are in their 60s or late 50s, early 60s started lifting weights. Basketball players, same. But still, it's just now coming around that your elite marathoners and your elite endurance cyclists are starting to lift weights and to take part in serious programming that's built within their training. So that's the kind of thing that strength brings to the overall plate for aging athletes. And the other part is that the research that indicates strength is absolutely more important now. Well, I won't say more important, equally important to endurance, because of the fact of the basic composition of our muscle fibers, fast twitch, slow twitch. Fast twitchers tend to deteriorate a little quicker than the endurance fibers. And I haven't, the only reason that I can think of is just the body's way of saying, well, you don't need to do this stuff anymore, or our lifestyles, are indicating we don't need to do this stuff anymore. So we don't, then they go a little bit slower and they go away faster. I mean, they go away faster and leave us a little bit lacking in our capacity. So that's kind of where I'm coming from an internal standpoint of strength. Also, it's my bias. I mean, even though I did the Ironman triathlon in 1981 as a lark, as a former collegiate swimmer going to marathons, then going to triathlons, it was never my metabolic profile to be an endurance athlete, regardless of how fast my best ever marathon got. It was never going to be at an elite level or even an amateur level. So,
Hey, Charlie, one question I know will come in, one for Tom and one for Charlie. So, Tom, you mentioned the two types of hearts with the thin wall, thicker wall, et cetera. Is one healthier or better than the other? I know that question will come in. And then for Charlie, when you talk about road cyclists, they're all about how light can I get because of the climbing. How do you convince that person to do some weight training? Because they think as soon as they pick up a weight, they've gained 10 pounds of muscle mass. So,
in terms of the heart, that is an interesting question. It'll be interesting to see, as we have now more strength people with thicker walls, what happens as they age and how that plays out. I don't think we really know that answer yet. I can tell you, though, that when you see an echocardiogram sound picture of the heart and the walls are thick, you do become slightly alarmed because there are some congenital issues that give thick walls, and distinguishing which is which, you have to be careful there. But when they have a strong fitness history, you think of it, it's probably just left ventricular hypertrophy. How that's going to play out in the future is, I think, a bit of an open question. The endurance athletes, we have a little more experience with them, and they do great. Your heart is a little bit slower. You're not thick. You're a little bit larger, but not much. but it's enough so that with each beat, you beat a few more cc's of blood. And, when you add that up, it makes a difference so that your cardiac output at rest is normal, just like everybody's, but at a lower heartbeat, lower workload, so that when it starts beating vigorously and pumping more forcefully and at a faster rate, you're able to increase your cardiac output, the amount of blood you can pump around, quite dramatically. And in terms of training, that's what we're talking about in terms of an athletic heart, the ability to increase the amount of blood you can pump around from when we're just sitting here to when you're either doing the butterfly, out on your bike, running. And that is really the adaptation of the heart. Now, if you take a weightlifter with a thick heart, smaller capacity, and you tell them to go out and run for an hour, it's going to be, it's going to take, that's not going to go well. That's going to take some training. That's going to take some training. On the other hand, if you take a under-muscled,
Take a bicyclist and ask him to bench press twice his own weight. That's not going to go well.
Upper body of a
professional marathoner, and you ask them to lift weights, it doesn't, you say, well, good luck.
Tom, is there ever any concern that exercise in people who might have a risk of having these asymmetric heart abnormalities, like septal hypertrophy that can cause or at least increase the risk of sudden death, that maybe some of these people might have a negative influence from exercise?
Well, certainly. And when you read about a 19-year-old on the football field in Florida, and it's hot and it's humid and they drop over, the majority of those people are going to have a congenital abnormality with a thick wall of their heart. It's got a long name. I won't bore you with it, but that's a common cause of idiopathic hypertrophic subaortic stenosis,
IHSS.
But that's a common cause for that, and that has happened on the basketball court, and we've gone through lengths of trying to figure out, can we screen for these people because it's not that common. It's really complicated, but those are niche cases, rare cases, and in general, we'd like everybody to be out there doing some exercise. But yes, there are always going to be a small subset of people who are at increased risk. And one reason for a physical exam is to look for that. And also when people have unusual symptoms, to really try and make sure that there isn't something else going on, which is why coaching matters, and having an astute coach who can look and see. I'm a believer.
I wanted to ask just a little bit. So we're talking about training and stuff, but one thing that I'll run into when I talk to people about exercising is there seems to be this sort of thing where, I'm too old. I'm too old to start. Or, I'm not quite sure where they get that, but I am interested in whether there's any time after which age exercise doesn't really improve heart health or perhaps some of the issues related to quality of life. I mean, is there an age where that's just not something?
There's not an age.
I don't think so, but I'll hear from Charlie.
We have data on this, particularly in cardiac rehab patients. So people that have had open heart surgery, stents, valvular heart disease. So we have data to show that at any age, you can show improvements with an appropriate monitored, exercise program.
And so that's good. Where do those, who monitors and sets up those programs? How is that done so that this person doesn't die? in the
Well,
most.
cardiac rehab, it's pretty clear because we have cardiologists, nurses, we monitor those people. That's a very small, though controlled environment. It's good because that generates data. But Charlie, you have more experience with the mass
Person in the
people that
world.
come in. Um,
So what do you do, Charlie? When they come in, if you have someone who's, what is your criterion? Is it their age or where they are physically in their health? Or, I mean, how do you decide as a trainer how you recommend what course they take? Do you have that happen?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, just to the original question about is there any time, just to follow up on what Tom was saying. Some of the research out there is incredible in terms of, and I think one of the questions we were looking at was how much does it take? Is it too late? It's not too late ever, and it doesn't take much.
Yay.
There was, and these are all coming off the top of my head, so forgive the nebulousness of my data, but it was somewhere in the range of 5 to 10 minutes on a slow treadmill for a group of relatively sedentary seniors that improved all of their markers, whether it was cardiovascular, blood sugar,
their lipids, right?
yeah,
Blood
lipids,
pressure.
etc. All of those markers, and it was only like 2 or 3 times a week, maybe less, 5 to 10 minutes, slow, active. The point was it was more activity than they had done previously. Okay, then there's a really seminal study on a senior care home where they introduced strength training and the improvements in strength. This is in a care home with people who can't get out of bed on their own. There was improvements in strength from anywhere from 50% to 180%. And the stat that just sticks in my mind is that after the study, the care home saved like 40 grand a year, and because the population didn't, half of them didn't need help getting out of bed. That group that lifted and all of that. So again, to that original question, never too late. Any amount is enough, as long as it's kind of follows the law of increased activity and increasing your at each time trying to get a little bit better at what you're doing, with rest, of course. But that's what has been out there. And back to the question about how do you convince an endurance athlete that they're not going to gain too much weight to be able to perform adequately. One, the vision of a bodybuilder is always in everybody's head, okay? And two, genetically speaking, there is not an endurance athlete in the world who could get the body of a bodybuilder and put that much bulk, no matter how hard they trained. Three, even if you did have that genetic capacity, you would have to give up, your cycling or your running to be able to get that big and bulky. And the other thing to consider is complementary training, is that the more your cardiovascular training or endurance training increases, the more it has an effect on your body composition and your muscle composition. So by the very nature of training for endurance events, there is a dampening effect on your ability to put on bulk and muscle and such. Now you can get stronger, you can get, you just have to kind of modulate it to be able to understand what your, how your strength versus your body weight is playing into whatever your overall activity or your passion is, especially at our age, because it's all about what we love to do.
Yeah, that's great. And I think a part two to Sue's question, when does a senior athlete, when are you doing too much?
When you can't get out of the couch and do other things other than train.
We all take naps at our ages, right? So does that?
Yeah, no, naps are great.
Yeah.
But I think you have to total up the sum function, the total amount of time you spend training, and do you, and the other things you want to do. Okay, is all you want to do in your life, win that century in your age group, win your age group in triathlon or a running event or even a powerlifting contest, and that's all you want to do, perfect. But if you've got other things going on in your life, family, still working a little bit, DIY projects around the house, cooking, etc., gardening, everything, then, and you want to do that, but you're too tired to, that's too much. Okay. And again, who needs another trophy, right? Who needs another participation medal? Or a t-shirt. I mean, come on, we've got them all, guys. So
Yeah, another t-shirt, right?
We've talked a lot about subsets, but I think there is a subset of elite professional masters athlete out there. Yeah, that's a subset, just like the cardiac rehab is a subset. They're two different things. I think we're talking a little bit more about the general population, and so you mentioned longevity versus quality of life. And to me, it has to be both, and it has to depend upon how your training works out.
You want to focus a little more on recovery, because one of the things that does come up is kind of the practical things that you advise people. And certainly what you said about, if you're too tired to get off the couch to play with the grandkids or whatever, then, that's too much. But
yeah.
How about, for those people who are exercising an hour or two, 5 days a week, and, they want to do it correctly. They don't want to overdo, but they also do want to get stronger and better.
Sure.
Practically, what do you advise them? What are they looking at?
Well, I think there's a lot of markers out there that are indicative of it. Certainly, we've all followed resting heart rate since the mid 70s. I mean, that's always been a factor. If you get a big spike in your resting heart rate, that's something that should give you some indication that you need to back off a little bit. Now, for me, heart rate variability is one very interesting in terms of the aging process. And then secondly, it's a really decent indicator of how much stress the body is under as a whole. And Tom, you may remember it from your cardiac experience. It was introduced in the 50s and 60s, I think,
right,
as a way of measuring how much stress the body is under in the cardiac situation in the hospital environment, correct?
Right. But it's, the measurement of it, though, is been more refined recently. It used to be a little harder to figure out what it was and what does it mean. So there's more on that now.
Yes.
And it's easier to measure now, but it does reflect your sympathetic and parasympathetic tone. And is a good thing. So if your heart rate variability does narrow and is less variable, then that can be a marker that there's an imbalance somewhere. And often, that might be overtraining and time for a few more rest days.
Yeah.
So are you actively looking at that? Are you using that?
No, you actively look at it. I'm actively looking at it, and anyone who is competing in any kind of activity, whether it's a triathlon or endurance event, or even I had a pair of hikers that were doing these big climbs. And so we're down here in Louisiana. They also work. And my specialty in terms of training is training somebody in endurance at a little bit higher intensity than what is normal. Like the 80-20 effect is typically how one does endurance. Well, my preference, people come to me and say, well, I have kids, I have a job, I have this and that and the other. How can I do an Ironman triathlon? It's okay, well, here you do. We're going to set up a routine that's super high intense during the week. You have to take a day off during the weekend. Okay, you can't take that Monday off, okay, where you don't get to be of benefit to anyone other than your job, right? So you got to spend time with your family. And then we're going to monitor heart rate variability. We'll set it up as a 2-week on, 1 week recovery, 2-week hard, 1 week recovery scenario. But we're going to monitor heart rate variability during the tail, especially during the second week of the high intensity activity, so that we're not overloading you and bringing you down into a trough that you can't climb out of. And just to clarify for the folks at home, heart rate variability is the time between heartbeats. Logically, if you say your heart rate is 60, that's a second a beat, correct? But it doesn't really work that way. And Tom brought out how the different variabilities, windows, narrows, or expands. A more variable heart rate, think reggae man, where you're playing the Jamaican music and you're dun, 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 dun. You got this variable beat going on in your heart rate. We will not talk about other activities that go along with that in Jamaica, but or if your heart rate is boom, 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 like a techno beat, and you're waiting for the bass to drop, you might have that bass drop because the intensity is, and from a standpoint of explaining it, I think it's more like the heart is trying to get nutrients and healing components and whatever at a more regular basis to your tiring system. I don't really know the ins and outs of it though. Whereas when you're more relaxed, rest and digest and all of that, you can do that on your own without any huge amount of focus, and that means your system's a little bit more recovered.
Charlie,
Tom?
do you have any numbers or ranges of
Well,
variability in athletes that you're looking at to say, gee, I think you need to take a step back, or gee, you look like you're well recovered and you're primed for this race, or whatever that it is that you're looking forward to. And does this variability actually lessen with age?
yes, to the last part, that's what I'm finding out. I've been doing it since 2015 and have seen a steady, I don't even know how to quantify it, or lowering of whatever the number or the numeric quantifier is in my overall capacity. Now, there's a couple of caveats for me personally. One, my activity level has decreased, and we all gave our ages out, so we're almost all the same age. So what happens when you kind of go from an hour a day to 40 or 30 minutes a day, or you miss 3 months, or you miss 6 months because of commitments? So it's all different for us at this age. But back to the number effect, it's more individual. So let's say, and every device, if you have an Apple Watch or a Garmin, I know Apple and Garmin have functions for heart rate variability, or the Hova, any number of other things. You can also go online and get apps. All of them will have different numbers, okay? And all of, in terms of how they rate heart rate variability. What we look for is that individual's specific baseline, give or take 10 units of variability on either side. And then you look at how that ebbs and flows with the amount of training. So let's just use the number 50 as an arbitrary number, and that's that person's baseline heart rate variability. So if you see them slipping down towards 40 consistently over the course of the 2-week or whatever length of your training block is, one, you may be doing exactly what you want within that, and that's kind of the purpose of it. And then two, that there's a week coming up that there's some recovery, because at that point we just do easy training, and from that standpoint, and then everything is going as planned. Now, if it slips under 30 or under 40 midway at the end of the first week, you're training them too hard, so you back off a little bit. And the same thing occurs in Tom, and also in the you can be extremely parasympathetic, or in the Jamaican zone where you're too chill. But that's mainly because that's your body forcing you into it's going, I'm trying to recover you, dude. I'm trying to recover you, and you're not listening. So you use the baseline, 50, using 50 as an example. You would say 60 as your top end on the one level, and 30 as your bottom end on the other. And then you kind of plan your training in and around that kind of intensity. And the beauty of it for me is that it measures all of your load, all of your what you call the allostatic load on your body, whether it's your training or it's your environment, hot as crap out here in the day in Florida and Louisiana. What else is going on in your life with your family and your job and everything else. So it's a measurement of the overall stress that you're under. And that's, more critical for us amateurs, who have jobs, and even those of us who are over 65 who are now seeing some decrements and that natural inflammatory process that comes just by sitting around and getting older, So that's important to me, and having that baseline as a monitor. Other monitors are like a easy effort and measuring what your heart rate response is. So if you go out and you do a 45-minute ride or a set of 3 sets of 10 on an exercise, something that's supposed to be moderate, and you get a heart rate response of your heart rate at a moderate at this rate on this ride is 85 to 100 beats per minute. And then you go out on that same ride in the middle of a 3 or 4 week training block, and it's the same exact ride at the same exact speed, and yet it's your heart rate is 10 beats higher. It's harder to do that same easy ride.
Right.
Just like if you're a weightlifter, you go, and my philosophy of weightlifting is to go through your entire exercise menu once at a lightish, warm-up-ish weight, then a second time at what we call a transitional weight, where you're trying to see where your body is. And if you do, and then you have a peak weight and maybe a second set of peak weight. If you go through it on that second transition and it feels like a peak, something else is going on, inside you. That ain't the body you brought to the gym 2 weeks ago, or the body you bought on that ride 2 weeks ago. So those kind of things are ways to monitor how you're performing. And to me, it is very individual. Everything is very individual from a exercise and response standpoint. But for me, it's you just have to be able to plan your intensities a lot more judiciously, and your hard efforts a little more judiciously.
So two questions came in. I think one for Tom, one for Charlie. First one is, as we get older, active recovery or inactive recovery? And number two is that, let's say you have two endurance athletes. One has a resting heart rate of 40 and one has a resting heart rate of 60. Does that mean anything? So take it away.
I'm happy to respond to that second one, because it does not mean a lot. People's individual heart rate varies, and you can have two athletes side by side. One will start with a heart rate of 45, one will start with a heart rate of 60. The guy or gal at 60 might get it up to 180 at peak, and the one that starts at 45 might get it up to 165. But they can have the same cardiac output, they can perform identically. There's just enough variability. In general, particularly with endurance athletes, the heart rate comes down, and that's fine. We start getting a little bit anxious when the heart rate gets below 45. We start getting even more anxious when there are pauses that you can see. 3 seconds, we tolerate 3 seconds all the time. Obviously, if you had 3 seconds for a minute, that would be a heart rate of 20. That would not be good. But a single 3-second pause is not a problem. 4-second pauses start to get a little nervous. 5-second pauses, we're very concerned, especially if they're symptoms. But there are many superb athletes that will have heart rates down in the 30s when they're asleep. It's not a problem. When they're awake, believe me, they can get their heart rate up and they can perform incredibly well. So the difference is small. It is interesting that endurance athletes have a lower heart rate. Everybody, as they get older, gets a lower heart rate. There's names for all this. It's one of the most common causes for having a pacemaker. And we are finding that some endurance athletes will start with a lower heart rate, get some sick sinus syndrome. Their sinoatrial node will deteriorate a little bit. Yeah, they'll need a pacemaker. It's not a big deal. They need a pacemaker, we can put a pacemaker in. It's not anything to be concerned about. So, if your heart rate is really slow, we are interested. We have a good fix for that. But it's really not anything to be concerned about. And I can remember jogging with people that would have their alarm set at 190. And, this is a very good woman athlete who's 5'2", weighs 113 pounds. I don't know how many Boston marathons she's done. I can't count that high. But, it went off when it got to 190. We said, oh, maybe we better slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
That's what it took for me. I've never seen 190. If I did, I would be better. It would not be good. So, there's a lot of variability. Charlie?
Just to kind of follow up on the heart rate, the most important number in your heart rate is not your low number, your high number. It's the number in which you recover after 1 or 2 minutes. So after a peak effort. So just off the top of my head and in general, very general, and let's continue the notion of individual variability. And just like Tom said, there was a woman, who can run and get her heart rate up to 190. And again, you described the actual profile from a size standpoint of somebody that seems like tends to run at a little bit higher motor. The shorter, lighter people who are really super good endurance athletes have a lot higher motor. But basically, it's after, say you are like exhausted and breathless. That's how we kind of test folks, and you see what their heart rate peaks at. After a minute, you're hoping, fingers crossed, that it's at least 20 beats per minute recovery. After 2 minutes, between 30 and 40, and you get that slow, steady decrease after that. That's kind of the most important number in terms of measuring capacity, how you can recover after an intensive effort. And that's somewhat, it is individual, but it's indicative, more indicative. Back to the question about active or inactive recovery. I mean, active recovery and all of the recovery science seems to be the one thing that works. You finish your effort and you do something easy to kind of keep the heart rate up at a little bit higher level, and perhaps it's processing the metabolites from exercise a little bit more, whereas opposed if you stop immediately and don't do anything, you're kind of letting that pool. It's not super definitive, but it's that thing, active recovery, or the next day doing something easy after something hard on the previous day. That seems to be what the research is looking at. Any of these magic recovery tools, the research is all over the map, and invariably, no, seriously, and it's impossible to get a control group with any of these things, okay? Something like dry needling or cupping or compression. How do you get a control group with dry needling? Here we are, sticking this needle in you. Can you feel that needle control group? No. I mean, it's not like that famous control group with the arthritis in the knee, rheumatoid arthritis in the knee, where they did fake surgery. They opened up, sprayed around, closed them, whereas they actually did the surgery on the other group. And the control group had a response of, my knee is better now. Thank you for doing all this surgery on my knee. And they didn't have surgery. So, I mean, it's not the same thing. So these magic recovery tools that are out there, here's what the research says. Well, there's nothing in our research that says this works. But if it makes you feel good, go ahead and do it. So that's the part about recovery that I have.
Good. All right, Sue, next question.
I think we could go for the moment. We've actually covered a lot of them in the first topic already because of the way the answers and discussion have gone. So I think it's pretty good. We're going to go on to topic 2, which has to do with exercise programs. and their effects on strength and endurance. And specifically, we're thinking about, oh, we sort of touched on this already, but there's two types. There's strength and endurance. Okay. And they both can improve longevity and quality of life. And it's also under the best case scenario, the quality of life is increasing. It will also enable athletically inclined individuals to achieve their athletic goals. So there's sort of this idea that sometimes, the programs might only focus on strength or endurance. So one of the questions we could start with, which is pretty straightforward, is there an ideal balance? So this is an older, mature individual in terms of balance of strength, power, and endurance training programs. So that extends both, well, actually, that might meet all three of those: longevity, quality of life, and athletic goals. Or so when we think about programs for older people in general, is it a balance between, you're going to have weights, and you're going to look at power, and you're also going to be working on endurance? And then do you do those all at the same time, or do you do them in different proportions? So just maybe start with sort of the person that exercises regularly but is not a professional athlete.
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, Carly, you.
All righty. Well, my preference is for individuals to kind of look at what their basic metabolic profile is. And there's any number of ways that you can determine whether you're a fast twitch, slow twitch. And when I say metabolic profile, it's what is your muscle fiber composition, and which has the attendant neuromuscular component, the attendant nutrition component, utilization of fuel component. All of that makes your profile completely different from a strength person and an endurance person, an endurance female and a strength female. There is some significant differences there, males and females. So let's just start with one, determine what you are best at. What was your athletic background? So I did the Ironman triathlon in 1981. I was a college sprinter. Okay. I did that. I was able to do that because of back then swimming was insane. They trained everybody the same way. It didn't matter that my event lasted 20 seconds or so. I was still going to train 3 to 4 hours a day, right? Whether I was a distance guy or not. We did get less than the distance guys, but it was crazy that, we still train like that. It's a lot better now. So that allowed me, with the training and the heart background, to be able to do an Ironman triathlon. Badly, but I could still do it. So as you age, you kind of refer back to what you were really good at. If you were a sprinter, or if you were a weightlifter, or you were a thrower in the track field, or if you even if you didn't do sports, what is your training like? Did you ever try weights? Did you put on muscle quickly? Did you ever try running? Did that come easily to you quickly, or was it miserable the whole time? Or when you did weights, you just lifted as hard as you could and you maybe improved 10 or 15 pounds on your efforts? So try to figure out what you are primarily composed of metabolically. And then at that point, it seems to me that for efficiency and for health and for longevity, and this is just a guess, you should train towards your strengths, okay? But strength training people need to get endurance to be able to do a strength training workout. They have to be in shape to do an effective strength training workout. Their heart needs to be in shape. And as we talked about, even though the cyclists, want to be light to get up that hill, they still have to have a little muscle to be able to get up that hill. So you have to kind of play towards your strength, mostly if you're maybe 60 to 65% more towards what your body is good at. And then the other part is to help you with your passion on the other end, what you're not, you train the strength to be better at endurance, and you train endurance to be better at strength. If that makes a certain amount of sense. Talking about males and females, the interesting thing here is that the way females are better at endurance in general is primarily because of the capacity to fat metabolize better than males. And fat metabolism and fat stores are in more of an endurance type of fueling and utilization of fuel, whereas with your higher performance activities, it's more quick glycogen, carbohydrate, quick boost to replenish your system. So females can do, let's say, better at endurance, but they can be better in the weight room, and they can do more sets at a similar weight, and be more enduring in the weight room. And when it comes to being all out max efforts, females, because of that fat metabolism preference, you need to kind of measure out that high intensity, whether it's a power or plyometric set or maximal power of 3 to 5 repetitions, or what strength at 3 to 5 repetitions. Females will need more recovery from that overall workout the few days afterwards. You could, if you were training a collegiate athlete, it'd be every other day, high intensity, right? Well, now we probably know in the athletic training that if you have females in the weight room too, and in the power room too, you wouldn't do it every other day. You might, one, figure out what their individual is, but two, set up a standard prioritization where you are doing high intensity a little bit less for 2 days straight or whatever, finding out that individual preference is there. So
Vern, you're kind of into this training thing. You asked a lot of questions about sort of HIIT strategies. That's high intensity interval training for people who might not know. And so that form of training, and then you talked about another one that I wasn't actually familiar with, which is rapid movement. Vern, I think you asked about that. It's a high, really fast, repetitious, possibly in any category. In other words, it's tempo rather than mount.
I think you might be referring to high velocity training.
Yes.
Well, that could be. Well, okay, there might be a difference between velocity and tempo, but generally speaking, I think about. So, I mean, maybe you can clarify that, Charlie, that so we have HIIT training, which is high intensity over relatively short intervals, and there's a big discussion about what the ideal is. I think people think it's 20-10, but you might have a different opinion. And then the velocity versus tempo? I mean,
velocity versus intensity, I think.
Okay.
You can train to be fast and concentrate more on the speed than the intensity. Although when you're training for speed, eventually it gets intense. But is training for speed more important in a master's athlete than training for high intensity? Meaning achieving, a high percentage of your heart rate with each set. So
jump in there if I'm getting this wrong. I think when you say speed, we're talking about. I think we're talking about more about the rest in between efforts. Okay, so if you're riding a bike, and since you guys are all cyclists, we'll use that analogy. Then you set a speed type of training protocol whereby your workout is you warm up 20-30 minutes, Then you kind of build up your body to get used to higher heart rate, higher muscle activity, and then you start your workout. And that workout would be something to the effect of 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes, as hard as you possibly go, as fast as you, and you're looking at the speedometer as your guideline and how fast you can go, and then you recover. And that recovery is basically whatever you can do to be ready to do this as close to that velocity as you can on the next 1 to 2 minute interval. Like, is that what you're looking at from a velocity and a speed training type thing?
For example, in biking, I guess a high intensity interval would be, say, as going to one of Rick's Friday classes where he's looking at high intensity in terms of speed, and he wants everybody to be up at or even above their functional threshold of power. And so for some people, that might mean a really high gear, and you're spinning the pedals around at 60 or 70 and 80, versus maybe a high velocity workout where Rick has said, well, we want you to hit that functional threshold of power, but we want you to turn your cranks at 120 RPM. So you're now doing a higher velocity of effort to put that same power out. So, or someone say who's running, running fast versus running quick. And that might be a little bit hard to explain. If you're running fast, fast is fast, speed is speed. It's the distance for you to get down the road. But running quick might mean doing either a set of intervals or a scheduled distance at a more rapid foot pace, say 200 paces per minute or something like that.
And I understand what you're saying, Vern.
And for example, for weightlifting, it's getting that weight, maybe less weight, but getting it pressed rapidly, rather than just kind of pressing it at your usual pace. So high velocity can mean high intensity, but it's not always your highest intensity. In other words, concentrating more on your neuromuscular effort rather than your muscular effort.
Okay, so I think I think what's happening is you're nuancing a couple of different styles of workouts. Basically, when you're training for any activity, you have endurance, you have strength, and you have power. And then you have reactive, and power kind of includes a bunch of different types of workouts. So if you're training for endurance, we all know what that is, okay? You're training somewhere within the specific heart rate, functional threshold. You're trying to train and do that 80% of your workout at a low level of intensity, but the duration of that workout takes a while. It's a duration type of endurance type of training. Okay, then if you are training for strength and power, there's some differentiation there. Strength is moving weight, a specific weight. It doesn't matter how fast it is, whether it's, you're pushing up the weight and it takes you 10 seconds to lift 200 pounds, or if it takes you 5 seconds and then it deteriorates to 10 seconds and you drop it on your chest or on the floor, that's strength. Now, power is more of a prescribed type of thing, and tempo and velocity have come into training a little bit more, where you're lifting at a specific velocity, 1 second per rep, boom, 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 boom. 1.5 seconds, okay, you can do more, but you got to get faster or stay the same. 2 seconds, done, okay. You can transfer that into interval-based training on the road, where you have a specific target. You need to crank out, 300 watts for 3 minutes, and then you recover as long as it takes to get you to do the next 300 watts for 3 minutes. And then at some point within that sequence, no matter how much you rest, it ain't going above 250. It's going to go 200. It's going to go 150, and you're struggling and going as fast as you can to try to make it. As far as the tempo and the rhythm of the RPMs on your bike or the RPMs on your foot strike, there's an ideal sprint in tempo in cycling, pedal stroke in cycling. You can see it at the end of the Tour de France. It's in the up 150 to 200, but very rarely do you see that in any other time. But that's rapid movement. So maybe you need to train that a little bit every now and then, but that's just something to be able to create a little more neuromuscular response at that top end. But by and large, you're cycling between 80 and 110, 120, correct? I mean,
Yes.
that's from previous experience. So that part of tempo is and the velocity is true, but I think that's more of a, that's all, it still comes under the interval training based thing, where you're trying to go as fast as hard as you can and recover. And then depending upon what you're trying to accomplish with that interval training, 300 watts for 3 minutes, or even 400 watts for 2 minutes, or 450 at 1 minute, you know, you set the criteria, you recover till you can do it again. That's more of a speed type of being able to maintain your speed for a longer period of time type of thing. Then there's the short rest, high intensity interval, where you're going 1 minute, but you're only getting 30 seconds rest. 1 minute, you're only getting 30 seconds rest. Kind of based on the famous Tabata principle of 20 seconds all out, 10 seconds recovery, 20 seconds all out, 10. That's a little bit different from rest as much as you need to be able to go 300, you know. And let me add a quick caveat to the Tabata type of training, and as it responds to conditioning, yes, it does improve your endurance, but the original study was based on 10 seconds, 20 seconds all out, 10 seconds recovery, 20 seconds all out, and they were on a bike. Now, they were cranking out 600 watts during that 20 seconds. Okay, then they had 10 seconds rest, and then they had to get back on it and do 600 watts again. And then they got their 10 seconds rest. And so you can see the intensity of that. Once, and they only had a maximum of 8 intervals to do, or once they fell below that 600 watt threshold, if it was 6, if it was 7, that was it. You weren't allowed to struggle home. You know, you had to peak and then get out. So that's how the different interval trainings are. And one relates more towards endurance, one relates more towards speed. I hope I got close, Vern.
Oh, that was good.
Close enough.
Okay.
Sue, continue.
Okay, I had a question. Oh, there's this interesting phenomenon that you sort of have described in your work in different things, and it has to do with individuals who don't respond. It's like, whoa. All right, so they might not respond to strength endurance training, or maybe they over respond, which is kind of interesting in itself. So I think Vern in particular, I'm not sure why, but he was quite interested in figuring
When
out.
you look at non-responders.
Right.
Yeah. Can you change these? What is it that's wrong or not wrong? There is a difference, and I think I understand, maybe I can guess why you might get this phenomenon. But if you have a non-responder, can you, all right, there's 2 questions. In the scenario you're using, can you get them to respond? And then if that's not possible, what do you do to turn them into a responder? So if you wanted to increase, for example, their strength or something else.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to what that person wants to get better at. If we're talking about athletes and as we age. And the concept of non-responders and high responders is basically as simple as a bell graph, okay? You're going to have in any study, and you guys being in research, you see it, you have, some people who don't do well on one thing, and other people, all, the same, whatever it might be, a drug or a vitamin or a type of workout protocol or a diet. Okay. Some folks respond better to different types of nutrition. Some don't, paleo, etc. Then we'll get into a nutritional thing, but that's why the confusion exists between all the basic nutritional plans and programs out there, is that you'll get one person who is a high responder, then one specific, I'm just eating liver all my life, and they say everybody should do that. But it all comes back to, how your genes are structured, how your overall composition is. So with a specific workout and a lot of the research with non-responders, it had more to do with dose. So Vern, instead of doing 2 sets of weights in the gym, you might need to do 4 to 6 weights to get a notable response. Now, your passion isn't the weight room, it's cycling. So what you're trying to do then is find that if you're adding strength to your programming, you want to find that specific sweet spot that gives you a little response. And you may have to, it might be something as simple as taking an 8 exercise program down to 4 exercises, where you're focusing in on getting better at those specific 4, whether it's squats or step ups or deadlifts or lunges. You're going to try to train your quadriceps on this specific exercise 4 sets instead of 2 or 3 or 5 sets to try to get some strength in that, as opposed to trying to do lunges, step ups, and all that. Same thing with upper body, hamstring exercises, deadlifts, hip extensions, things of that nature. That may be a way to get some response out of it without having to sacrifice an enormous amount of cycling time to dedicate your life to being like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Boom. So that kind of thing is how a non-responder gets to be responsive. As far as an over-responder, that's more of another effective training. And again, we go back to complementary training. If somebody's super strong, but we want them to get better on the bike or running, then they just do more running and more biking and less lifting, so that they can kind of tamp down that strength and build some endurance into the whole factor. But it goes back to, we have to understand what our individual response is to everything. And then we have to understand so genetically we're set up to respond to workouts and nutrition protocols a certain way. Then you add gender into that. Then you add aging into that. So it's a whole soup of factors involved that we can, as exercise enthusiasts, the best we can do is say, this is what is a great thing to do. You just have to understand that there's all these factors here, and we're making these recommendations based on a lot of generalities. And what you do as an individual is you find out what works best for you in the circumstance.
I really like in your articles the way you talk about, once people get in their 70s, it's a bit of a mystery as to exactly what's going on. Multiple factors are going on, and certainly injury is one of them that sets people back, and which is another reason why training is important, to try and avoid injury. That's really one of the goals that becomes higher on the list the older you get.
Correct.
But if you're encouraged to do more high intensity, rapid velocity, training for power, isn't there some concern that in the masters athlete that would increase their risk of injury to the point where they couldn't do those workouts anymore? I mean,
absolutely. And I forget, what can we do, right? Well, we can not follow programming set up for 25-year-olds.
Right.
Okay.
all
All right. 2, we can look at, see what, and to me, it's those athletes right now between 45 and 55 that are competing at the masters level.
Yeah.
They're your templates. And we're just the guinea pigs out there. But they probably have this whole thing mapped out. One would think there's a lot of ego going on there. But after 55, and I think we all have found that, somewhere between 55 and 60, things start happening. Doesn't necessarily debilitate you or amount to a lot of degradation to your performance if you've been consistent. But what it does do is it gives you pause. You become a little bit more liable for injuries. You cannot train the same way you did in your 50s. Okay, I think now in this zone, 65 and older, we have to kind of figure out what works. We use the things like heart rate variability and the recovery workouts and things like that to help tell us how to train as we guess our way through this, right? And be smart and find some experts or qualified individuals who have experienced this and also look at the research. And that are, I mean, you can see there are, 80-year-old women who are deadlifting more than 300 pounds. Okay, so I mean, I don't deadlift more than 300 pounds, but you can see, and I lift weights as a preference. So that's out there that, you're not going to break apart if you try to do specific things, whether it's high intensity sprinting or velocity and all that. You just have to do it judiciously. And then you have to kind of do it in a measured dose where you're going, oh, look, I've done 2 of these 1 minute all out up the hill sprints. I still feel good. I think I could do 3 to 4 or 5 more. And this is what we would think of when we were in our 50s, right? Well, now we got to go, I did 2. I feel good. That's all. Let me try 3 in 2 weeks.
Not always.
Let me see what tomorrow brings, how I respond. My wife and I went dancing the other night and I sprained my big toe.
Oh,
And what the heck, but it's just, even though there's some foot things in my training protocol, so it's just that kind of unexpected thing that pops up. You have to kind of work your way through it, not drink so much tequila when you go dancing.
Train your toe harder. Yeah, that's
as long as you didn't kick your wife, you're okay.
Work that big toe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Charlie, I think it's also, at least with cycling, I think it's the correct equipment on the bicycle that's going to fit the person. I think my philosophy is that customer goes in, gets a bicycle recommended by a salesperson, doesn't know if it's the right size, it doesn't have the right components on it, and then they go right to a coach because they want to start racing. So how much potential can that coach actually get out of that person until they go back and actually get a bike fit that the equipment works on them? I mean, I've had 25-year-olds coming in that are domestic pros that their knees are already blown out. And we put them on the right size cranks, and then they can rehabilitate and get back into cycling. Actually, Sue went through that. Both her and I have the Wahoo Kicker bike. And she was complaining she couldn't do. Here's one issue why they can't do the spinning exercise, because the cranks are too long. They're turning these huge cranks over, and you can only turn them over so fast. It also, too long of cranks puts a tremendous shear and compressive forces on the patellofemoral head, and starts abrading away the articular cartilage and causes all kinds. That's where the orthopedic surgeons got to go in and just scrape the knee up a little bit and smooth it back out again. But yeah, I think it's so important as we get older, get the right equipment, spend the time to get a bike fit and get the right equipment so you can continue into your 70s and 80s and 90s if you wish to, safely.
And would you say that there are signals that are given, like with anything, there's certain signals that you might get pre-injury, like something where, oh, I'm feeling this specific thing in your knee, early on, that you need to know that. Would that be the case?
I really don't see that. What it is for cycling, I can equate it to, you have a glass of water, and every time you do a bike ride, you put a drop of water in. Eventually, the body is absorbing it. and you get to the top and you're still fine. There's no pain or anywhere you're going. On one more ride, you put that one drop in and it overflows. That's what I see all the time. People don't have injuries or they don't feel any issue until that one ride that completely throws them out. That's what normally happens.
Okay. Yeah. That's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate, yes, but it happens so many times. I mean, I've seen, give a good example. There was a female triathlete. She was about 4'10", a little tiny bike, and the bike shop put 175 crank arms on her bike.
Jeez.
And the crank arms
guys
hit the ground when they were on and she complained of knee pain. I can tell you why.
Hmm.
So Sue, go ahead. Next.
That would call her women.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother topic. No, don't go there. So one of the things that is well, it's interesting, and it's how much. Well, I would be curious. So we have strength, endurance, and power, and this sort of thing. But one of the things that isn't talked about very much, and it's probably relevant for all athletes, but is balance. Physicians are starting to focus on it, kind of in the office as a general measure of physical, I don't want to say fitness, but capability, because it does have some very interesting relationships to overall muscular tone and function. So, are there exercises that you would put in training programs for balance?
Well, let's just start with this is more of a chicken or the egg type of thing.
Okay.
And there's research that indicates a couple of things. One, the stronger you get, the more balanced you get. Two, the stronger you get, the more flexible you get, depending upon how you're doing your strength training. Okay, now if you're doing a little mini squats or mini bench press or tiny push-ups, no, you're not going to get flexible that way. So that's what they're finding. And one of the things that strength training does is it creates neuromuscular connections. It increases the neuromuscular connections throughout the part of the body that you're working. So, and it's letting the body know that, hey, we got to increase the amount of connections because there's all this demand being placed on us. And again, you guys have to realize my bias is sprinting and strength training because of my particular muscle body composition. And I'm real big on confirmation bias and research hunting. Well,
that's a good thing.
But I have seen, talking about, the strengthening of muscles creates balance. Now, with respect to exercises, it's good to do single arm, single legs, single appendage exercises. One, to create a balance challenge like a lunge or a step up or a one-legged squat, come up, squat down to a box, come up, and things like that. And that helps to a certain extent address some weaknesses in specific appendages over the other. But as far as specific balance exercises, for me, unless they have a notable, a stroke recovery client or somebody with, some kind of impairment, then that just needs to create natural neuromuscular connections that have been interrupted by a stroke or an injury, where your nervous system is more attuned to that specific part of the body or that movement because of an injury. I don't know that those who strength train need specific balance type of things per se. I mean, if you can stand on your leg for 10, I think they're starting to quantify it and talk about it. But again, we're looking at the arguments that are being made for specific modalities are being made on mostly from the results of inactive people.
Right.
you
Yeah,
know.
okay.
But I
Well,
think
that's-
it really is a favorable trend, and it's fairly new. And if you do strength workouts correctly, you are, as you say, you are going to improve your balance. But a lot of people aren't. And the importance of balance, I think, is a fairly new phenomenon. But if you take care of patients, you can see as you follow them over time, there's just no question. People's balance does not improve unless they really work at it. And
Right.
so it's important to have some focus. And, you know, I guess this is one advantage of free weights versus a
Correct.
machine, is it just forces you a little bit more to work on your core, get that balance, strength.
Right.
And but it does take work, and it's worth it, because anybody that's been out jogging knows how quickly and easily you can stumble. It's just unfortunate. And
Yeah.
you know, so I think it's important, and obviously the recommendations have changed, and now balance is included for people 65 and over, and that's a new, didn't used to be there.
The risk of falls increases as you get older, and people are discovering that falls are one of the greatest contributors to our mortality as seniors.
Correct.
So, for example, if you break a hip when you're over the age of 65, the chance that you will not be around next year because you are dead approaches about 40%, which is absolutely shocking. But I think I would agree with you in that training for strength helps your balance, but I'm kind of looking at it as a way of increasing your muscle mass, which is actually an anti-frailty sort of maneuver. So people who have more muscle mass are less frail.
Correct.
The less frail you are, the less likely it is that you might fall.
Right.
But I would agree that sometimes there are things to balance that aren't really trained that well by having good muscle mass. I mean, for example, tripping and almost falling. And what's that reaction that you put your hand out, or you put your leg out to avoid losing your balance immediately, quickly. People who are old and frail, people who don't have the required muscle mass to do that, people who don't have fast twitch fibers left because they've been atrophied, their legs and arms don't go out that fast. That's why they fall on their face or go down and break their hips.
Vern is into agility training now. That's his latest focus. That's kind of a little bit new, but I think it's good.
Dancing or something, and making sure that your toes aren't in the way. Little things that contribute to keeping on your toes. Trying not to fall, trying not to be frail.
I look at it this way:
learning the new dance steps.
Vern got really good at cycling, then running, then lifting. So what is he going to do next? Agility training. So I don't know what afterwards. I'm still wondering where he's going after that. It'll be interesting.
Well, yeah, I want to throw a question at Sue, since you're in the neuroscience field. I think that is the new territory to explore, not only for elite level athletes, but what do you think about the different decreases in the different levels of neurotransmitters as we get older, and then the concept of inflammaging, where we generate more inflammation, or when we work out, we generate more reactive oxidative species, which is like inflammation and things like that corrode our overall system that we have to kind of recover from, and motivation. And, like for me, having read about it a little bit, it helps me to know that there's this natural neurotransmitter decrease that makes me less motivated. And then it helps me to know that once you get into an exercise workout, motivation increases because you increases these neurotransmitters. Where do you think that fits, I guess, within the aging process.
Well, in terms of the motivation, I don't know if you're speaking about endorphins and things that actually.
I don't know more about dopamine, which is it's kind of
Oh, okay, in the reward.
it's a motivation type thing, a reward motivation type of thing, but it does help to have your dopamine levels up a little bit to be able to start some kind of program or whatever, or do something.
Right, and I think that's important as a start. And for me, in terms of continuing, there is a favorable cognitive effect of exercise. It sort of is. I don't know if I could attribute it to endorphins, but it's something that if I've noticed that if I don't do it, everything kind of slows down to a point where I have a hard time getting motivated to do anything. So I start every day with a fairly intense set of exercises, and it continues for a bit, but that's how I operate. And so if I don't do that, I don't do that 7 days a week. I notice the days I don't do it, it's harder to get started. I do. It's not like I lay in bed, but it's a very different effect. In terms of the neural creation of active oxygen species and some of those things, some of the possible damages, I think that generally speaking, if you have a good cardiovascular system, this is very helpful because you need good blood flow to try to remove these things. But one of the things that's been researched recently that's really interesting is that older adults tend not to sleep well. And it turns out that there are some processes that we used to think that you'd go to sleep and that was when you were doing nothing. And that's not true for the brain. The brain actually needs pretty much the entire cycle that you might learn about with the slow wave, rapid eye movement stuff.
Right.
And if it's disrupted, there's some processes that go on during all of that may not be completed. And one of them has to do with, you might think of it as sort of your brain goes into a self-cleaning mode, sort of like a dishwasher.
Right.
So, if you can't achieve that great sleep, a lot of those protein debris, you might call it, or other things you don't really want to keep in your brain, will stay. And there's growing evidence that one of the processes they've talked about, and I haven't studied it a lot, is something called lymphatic flow. It's a little bit like, it's sort of a CSF fluid flush of all the spaces between the cells and neurons. Right. And this happens at night, and it doesn't happen during the day. So when you're awake, it's not happening. And so there's some evidence that process can be very important for preventing onset of dementia, different sorts of things that we start to see in individuals that, don't sleep. I mean, it's just not good for you. So in terms of exercise and how it might benefit these things, well, exercise can help induce and make people tired, possibly sleep better. So that would be one reason to exercise, and different people would have different levels of exercise required to induce this. But it does. I mean, if you get really tired enough, you might sleep through. And so I can go on and on. There's some very cool stuff in neuroscience that has to do with recovery, and these new methods in terms of people with stroke and enabling them to recover motor function, and using artificial mechanisms like chips that allow this person to actually control with their thoughts, an artificial appendage. I mean, so in terms of exercise, if if an older adult is exercising regularly, they can recover from what would be considered a catastrophic injury for a lot of people a lot faster.
Right.
Because the underpinning is all there. And so maintenance is big. And then when you see these people that get these injuries, and stroke in particular in older people, it makes a huge difference if you've built a foundation. And so those are the things that I get excited about, and, try to convince people, hey, you should really do some exercise.
Yeah.
It might help, in a sort of a funny, it's like banking, your saving account.
Right.
And you don't know when you're going to need it, but you can almost be guaranteed that anything you've put in the bank will help you.
Nice analogy.
Yeah, well, that's what I believe. I mean, I see the data, I see recovery. We haven't figured it all out, though. So many people don't really understand that, like, the neurons in the central nervous system don't really regenerate. And we haven't figured out how to have neurons reconnect themselves well in the brain or in the spinal cord, which is also central nervous system. So that's a problem. Peripheral nerves do regenerate. And so that's pretty interesting. And all of these problems are being actively researched like crazy. So hopefully.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anything else that anybody has any questions about?
Vern, anything?
Vern, you're a fountain. You have anything left? Where are those jokes?
I've been doused with a lot of information today.
Oh, it's good.
So, Charlie, in your opinion, and of course based on what you've seen, what are the most common mistakes that us supermaster athletes are making when we're currently in our programs of exercise? What's the most common thing that we're not doing right? Is that a fair question?
I think it's a fair question. I think the most common mistake might be remembering too much of what you used to be.
Oh,
I mean, on any level. I mean,
The older I get, the faster I was. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Yeah. But, there's a number of problems with that. One, you're never going to, even 10 years ago, if you're still training at the same rate that you trained 10 years ago, you get logic or dictates that you're going to be either a little bit slower, a little bit weaker, just a little bit. Doesn't have to be big margins, but that's, I think, one mistake. And then there's then the attempt to try to make up for it by doing more, which ironically, I think that doing more after a certain age is counterproductive. You need to rest more now. You need to take more time between intensive efforts. It doesn't mean you're going to get weaker or less conditioned by taking lower intensity days between more of those between the higher intensity than before. It means that your body is going to recover better, and in that recovery, you're going to get the benefit of the specific workout. And I mean, that's been my mistake all along. It's like, well, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, or I used to do this, and then now I've got to come back and do this one specific performance within my workout. Now it's more like I need to go easy until this shoulder pain goes away, or I need to go easy because I've got all this going on in this other part of my life. I just got to maintain, and I'm waiting for that moment or that day where it's a calm day and a calm week, and all right, let's hit it, do something, and then understanding that that's a small window, and you take advantage of those windows. You don't force them. You don't make yourself do that performance that you.
I wonder about the reactive oxygen species, and in our exercise, as you get older, your ability to clear that is somewhat reduced. And that is an issue because if you keep pushing that, it's probably going to be deleterious. There may be scarring. You're not going to recover. And, you know, just when you look at the biochemistry of it,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that is concerning. That's why we become more interested in recovery, trying to figure out what the balance is between pushing yourself and getting the right amount and allowing your body to get those ROS, get that out of there, inflammaging, you know, like that's a new word. This is a new concept, really, in the past, I don't know, 8 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good image. It's a good image that you have to worry about that. What we know about this, though, is so limited so far.
Charles, understand that you're speaking to 4 over exercises here. I think 4 of us all kind of tend to overdo it.
No, yeah.
Well, I think the 5 of us probably.
Yeah, probably even 5. Yeah.
So, you know, it's an interesting concept, and, you know, molecularly what's going on in there, and it's how do I get my satellite cells to go in there and say, come on, you know, rebuild that muscle. Come on.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
not happening.
Mitochondria.
It's not happening. Not happening by expectation.
Which might
Well,
kind
they're
of into,
saying, what they're saying is that give me time. I'm older. I need to take a little more time to repair those muscles now, you know? And that again, it's the hard part to do. And especially if all of us here are cognizant of the benefits of exercise, right? And the effects of aging. So we know that there's this magic pill to prevent or slow aging. How much of it can I get? Well, it's A, all individual, B, dependent upon a specific day and what's going on in your life and all that. So that's the big juggling act, I think, that we have.
so maybe that leads into maybe the last question is, many of us are afraid to go on vacation because we think we're going to lose too much fitness. How much fitness is the mature person going to lose in, to say, a 10-day vacation versus a young person? Is there, is walking just enough to do when you're on vacation to kind of keep that edge? Because when you come back to exercise, now you're going to feel that you've lost so much that you're going to start working out harder to get back to where you thought you were before.
I can only speak for myself, but even though it seems interminable, you know, every time you come back from whatever it might be, a specific injury or a vacation or an interruption because of something going on in your life, you know, it takes away all your free time to do your exercise and or you're too tired to get the workouts in. So far, it does come back. And I think you may all have experienced the same thing, if I'm not wrong. You know, if you've been active enough over the last 20 to 40 years, you know that it will come back. You're afraid every single time that it's not going to come back. This is the one, man, Elizabeth. This is the big one. You know, but it does, and I guess that's all we have to do is just draw a certain amount of confidence in that, and then maybe be confident in our previous training, and understand that this can be built in as a lull in the training, and then you can have a recovery from it. And I think that, and here's kind of the interesting thing about goals and all of that. If our exercise and our goals and our specific demands on ourselves is so high, we're creating yet another set of stressors based on the performance of our exercise. So I think we have to kind of bring ourselves back and understand, you know, and goes back to the question, Susan, you mentioned, was that quality of life versus longevity. I think they're both, and they go hand in hand. I mean, I think quality of life creates longevity, and so we have to kind of measure all that out and make sure that we are responding to everything that's going in our life and balancing our exercise within that, and then that brings us our quality, and just, I guess, to have confidence in the training. And that And know also, as we get older, it takes longer to get back, but you can get back.
Okay.
Okay. Well, with everybody here, I want to thank all of you really for taking the time to participate today. And I think in terms of what should drive your exercise really should be that it should be fun. You get up and you look forward to doing it because it's fun and it makes you feel good. And I think when it stops being fun, then you have to sort of assess what it is you're doing. But anyway, I enjoyed this very much. And hopefully I'll get a chance to talk. Well, I know I'll talk to Vern and Tom, but maybe we can talk Charlie into cycling with us at some point.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah.
It is fun. It
Give me
is fun.
6 months to get back on the bike.
Okay. Well, yep, I could do that. But anyway, I appreciate your time, and Rick will process this and we'll see how it is. So thank you very much for coming.
And for everybody for attending. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
It was fun. Thanks.
Take care.
Very enjoyable. Very enjoyable. See you later.
Bye-bye.